In this clip, I'm going to explain to you what sections you need in your final paper. So if you click on this document that says sections in your paper, you will find the rubric for the research project. This is what you should be looking at while you are writing your paper, while you're finalizing it. You need your introduction, which is not labeled introduction. There should be an introduction there. And it tells you what you need to have there. Your research question should be stated, and it should be measurable and observable. Then after the introduction comes your literature review. The literature review should have a heading. It can be literature review, or you can call it something else. You can call it a review of literature of cooperative learning, if cooperative learning is your topic, or you can just call it relevant research on cooperative learning, or you could call it cooperative learning. If you look at research articles that you've read for your classes, everything that comes before the methodology section is either the introduction or the literature review. Usually the introduction is a paragraph or two, and then when you see the first major heading, that's the literature review. The purpose of the literature review is to set the stage for your research. So you should be looking at things that are pertinent to your research, that are relevant to your research, and make sure that you read and write about enough so that it supports your research questions. So your literature review is the next section. Then comes your methodology. What you need to do is you need to describe your participants. Your participants are the people that you studied. So if you are interviewing teachers, you should provide a description of each of the people that you interviewed. That's the general rule. You should include their gender, how long they've been teaching, what area they teach in, if they're all in the same school district or the same general area. The tricky part is you need to do all of this without using names. So if you're doing your research study on teachers in Franklinville, you cannot say that it is Franklinville. What you're going to say is it is a small rural school district in upstate New York. You need to describe it. You can also maybe describe the socioeconomic status, all of those kinds of things that are going to be relevant to the research. The general rule is if you have fewer than 10 participants, which if you're doing interviews and observations you do, you should provide a description of each and every one of the participants. If you're doing surveys or you're doing some kind of pre-post in a classroom, then you want to just describe, let's talk about surveys first. If you're doing surveys, you want to describe how you disseminated your surveys, and then any demographic information you got about the participants from your surveys. If you're working in a classroom, you want to describe that classroom. What's the grade? What's the age range? What's the boys and girls? What is the general socioeconomic status of the school district? How many students with disabilities? How many students without disabilities? The purpose of describing your participants is so that people who are reading it can understand if the participants that you used in your research are the same or similar to the people that they are working with. Your methodology, you're going to describe how you gathered your data. Make sure that you include any instruments used for your data collection. You need to describe them, and then you should include them in the attachments. Your presentation of your results and an analysis of findings, sometimes those things go in the same general section. It depends on what your research is like. If you're doing qualitative research, so if you're doing interviews or observations, your presentation of your results and your analysis of your findings are probably going to be in the same section. You're not going to present your data separately and then talk about it and analyze it. If you're doing quantitative research where your data end up to be numbers, you are going to present those in some sort of a table or a chart or a graph, and then you're going to analyze them. Say, what are the differences that you found between groups? What are any statistically significant differences that you found? If you are doing a qualitative research study and your data are words, you cannot just, let's say you're doing interviews, talk about interview question 1 and tell me what everyone's answers were. You need to kind of analyze it and figure it out and use the same strategy that you used when you were doing your literature review, which is to look for overall themes. You also do not need to include your raw data in the appendix. So you don't need to include any notes from your interviews. You don't need to include your actual surveys in your paper, but remember, you do need to give those to me at the end of the semester so that I can keep them in my locked file cabinet for a period of 3 years, because remember, that was in your IRB. Your discussion is the so what. That's the so what difference does your study make? I would suggest you look through each of these. What limitations are there? And here's a little hint. Qualitative research in and of itself is not a limitation. If you have 3 participants in your research study, that is not a limitation. What the limitation would be is, because it's qualitative research, generalization can't be assured. So it's up to you as the researcher to provide some kind of description of the situation and the setting in order for the readers of your research to be able to transfer it. So in quantitative research, where your data are numbers, we talk about generalization. In qualitative research, where your data are words, we talk about transfer. So if I was you, I would look through each of these things. You're going to discuss your limitations. What would next steps for research be? So what are some future things that probably need to be researched? What is the impact on you? And this is where you can talk about your personal experiences and the field in general. And then you're going to talk about some possible causes for what you found. This is where you may want to do a little bit of additional literature review. One of the findings in my dissertation was that the high five has multiple meanings and purposes for teenage boys. I did not plan on finding that. So when I did find it, I had to go back and do some more literature review and included that in my discussion section. You are going to do an in-class presentation. It's not the in-class presentation format that you're used to, though. Remember, we're doing poster presentations. So this effective use of technology may not be you using a computer. What it probably will be is you using technology to create your poster. And we'll talk more about what the poster should look like in class. Your technical quality is APA is followed. There's no grammatical or mechanical errors, and the formatting is right. Part of APA style is you should have an abstract for your paper. The abstract should be the last thing that you write. It should be about 200 words or less, and it should not be a literature review, but basically be what your research question was, why it's important, what you did to try to answer or address your research question, and what your findings were. And then you get an overall score for your paper. Remember, you have to get at least a B in everything to pass the class. A B would be acceptable. So we have to make sure that we're at least at the acceptable level for the overall paper. So this rubric will really help you to figure out what sections you should have. You also, in addition to what's on this rubric, I already said you need an abstract and you need a cover page.